Okay, we're here with Jacob Nordangård, who we've been following on Vaken for some time. We've been posting some of his articles and summaries of them, and we wanted to talk to him because what's he describing in his book, Rockefeller Controlling the Game, and his articles. To us, it seems to a lot of those agendas are really being accelerated now with the current Corona crisis. And I want to ask you, Jacob, about the Rockefeller family, because that's in the title of your book,
Yes.
Rockefeller Controlling the Game. What's your opinion of how their quest started? Because it seemed they started something that became a quest for kind of dominating the world, and who helped them in the beginning?
Uh, well, the thing with the Rockefellers, I mean, they started. I mean, John D. Rockefeller, he started with the oil business and Standard Oil, the Standard Oil empire, and of course, that was very important just to have this uh, global business and global control. So it's always been a part of the Rockefeller agenda, one can say. But they also started early on to cooperate with other wealthy big families of the world, and especially in the 1880s, I think, they had something was called the oil wars, and it was the big interest at the time, and that was more or less the Rockefeller world against the Europeans and Rothschilds. So they had this kind of war going on for like 10 years. Then John D. Rockefeller, I mean, he came to the conclusion you can't beat you can't beat those. They are too powerful, have too much money, and control over banking interests. So he decided to invite the head of the Rothschilds to New York, and that was a huge thing to do because I mean, the most you send for them one of the most influential men in the world to come to you. so um, uh, so he was confident in himself, and in the end, this was like in 1890. They struck a deal and said we have to cooperate instead. And these two families have been friends since then. Um, and the Rockefellers became a part of. I mean, they started with this oil business, but they also became a part of the influential families of that time, and an agenda that has been carried out for a long time. I mean, it's very hard to say exactly when it started, but one important thing is the British Empire. And if you go back very long, we can see that the things started with another John D. Dr. John D. that was the court astrologer at Queen Elizabeth I's court. And he talked about creating an empire, and that the British Empire would rise and control the resources of the world. And that's a very interesting story, but it's not what I'm going to talk about now. I'm actually going to write some more about that, how this started. But this idea, things evolves out of the British Empire when the British fleet conquered the world. And in the 19th century, we have some influential actors in Britain that is talking about creating this global society, or more or less a perfected world. That's a goal, to do things better than it is now. One of those are a professor called John Ruskins, and he has some ideas for a future society, but influences a lot of people that go. He's at Oxford. I mean, and it's the most influential families send their boys to Oxford to be stewards for the British Empire, and one of those that attended was Cecil Rhodes, and Rhodes has been an important figure in starting this agenda. He wanted to get the British Empire to merge with the United States and bring back the colonies or into a British rule. And this starts a thing because he's very influential and he has connections to also these big banking families like the Rothschilds. And this comes to America after a while, and we have some important families in the American establishment, and of course Rockefellers are one of them. But in the early 20th century, they haven't that position yet. They are very rich and powerful, but we have other interests that are into this as well. And we have Morgan, J.P. Morgan, the banker J.P. Morgan, and we have also other industrialists like Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie is important in this because he comes from Scotland and has this idea of the British Empire, of course, and all those things that comes with it. And they start, both Carnegies and Rockefellers start in the early 20th century philanthropies. One thing is to have these philanthropies as a way to secure your wealth, because if you give away some parts of your fortune, you don't get taxed, and that's what's one of the things. But they also know that through money you can change things, and through philanthropy you can change society in a way that you think is fit for the world, and of course for your own power. We have an interesting thing. The Carnegie and the Rockefeller philanthropies start kind of at the same time, some years between. But they had a meeting at Carnegie, one of the first board meetings, and this is documented through the Rees Commission, what was done in the I think it was like in the early 50s. They wanted to investigate why big foundations give money to things that goes against American interests. like financing the Communist Party or whatever it could be. But they made an investigation, and they were allowed to check the documents from these foundations, the early years. And at the Carnegie Foundation, they had the first board meeting they asked a question. That question was, how can we change the world? What is the most efficient way to change the world? Is it a better way than war? And the answer was no, there is no better way than a war. Some years later, and that made them, how can we make a war? How can we get America in a war? And this was some years before First World War. And they concluded that they had to control the State Department. And how do you achieve that? And the war came because they influenced this. And out of this war came two things. The thing is, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, they had this cooperation with the British elite in this. And in the end of the war, they started a think tank in London called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and a think tank in New York called the Council on Foreign Relations. In these think tanks, they were very influential in these men that were involved in these think tanks were also in favor of the League of Nations, the creation of the League of Nations. So it was one of the first goals to achieve this global society that they wanted. So they had these think tanks, and especially for the Rockefellers, it was the Council on Foreign Relations. At that time, the Rockefellers weren't the most influential. It was the Morgan interest, the banking interest of J.P. Morgan. But the Rockefellers came into this more and more after they created the Rockefeller Foundation just before the war, and started to influencing what happened in the United States and all over the world, because they were financing a lot of research, what was important to do research about, and so on. And also education. They started early on to funding education in United States in order to change the society to a global society. And I mean, it was this and more or less this Anglo-American idea, an Anglo-American rule of the world. But when it was really taking off, it was, I mean, League of Nations, the United States never signed for, they never became a member because they couldn't get it through the Senate. So they started a new project, and it was the Council on Foreign Relations in New York that started a project in the 30s to create a new world organization. And that organization was to become the United Nations. And the Rockefellers were very influential in the creation of United Nations, and also they donated the land in New York that they built the new UN headquarters after the war. And if you go into the history of how the war started, you find also that they financed Hitler, and they had also been involved in the Russian Revolution as well, and building up these powers. Then started this war. And the conclusion was, we after the war we have to have this world organization with more muscles to so that we don't have to have this war again. And after the Second World War, the United Nations were in New York, and the Rockefellers was more or less on the top of their power. Very influential. I mean, America won the war. They surpassed the Great Britain. So to be the leading family at that time in the United States gave them tremendous power, and they started to get involved in the White House, in the White House affairs, especially through Nelson Rockefeller. It was the son of John D. Rockefeller Jr. He had president ambitions. He wanted to be the president of the United States. He was his life goal. And Nelson Rockefeller, his ambitions made that he took this ideas, that came from the Council on Foreign Relations and all these families that were connected to the Council on Foreign Relations, and of course the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London, the same club. And he, in order to prepare for his own presidential campaigns, he started a project at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, because we had the Rockefeller Foundation that John D. Sr. and Jr. started, and then we had the Rockefeller Brothers Fund that were started by the Rockefeller brothers, the son of Jr. And that was these brothers had is very important in the 20th century for history. We have the oldest brother, the third, John D. the third. He was into population issues, population control, and he was the head of the Rockefeller Foundation and started the Population Council. Very, very important things. And we have Nelson, of course, with into politics, and Lawrence Rockefeller into environmentalism, conservation, issues that became very, very important, of course, later in the 20th century. He was also the head of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund for 20 years, I think, or more. And David Rockefeller, of course, that became, the most, one of the most important bankers in the world at that time. And the last brother, Winthrop, not talked about that much, because he was involved in politics as well, but in a smaller. He was governor of Arkansas. So, but these brothers, they. And under Nelson's, he was kind of a new leader of the family. So Nelson wanted to start something, and he took these ideas of creating this new global society, and he started something called the Special Studies Project with money from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and as the head of this was he took an young academic called Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, because the thing is, the Rockefeller family has always, they know to pick up the best minds to further this agenda. And Henry Kissinger, he became the director of this project. And in this project, they stated that they had got the, because more or less their wealth and power, they were a part of this emerging global elite. They had to, they should create, they say it in this report, a new world order that were to include economics, health, education, social issues, everything you can think about. So in the, this was in the late 50s, and this report, it took some this question what we talk about today. It was in this report because they said that they wanted to have important, I mean, problems. They wanted to discuss problems that span the globe, but was going over the borders. And some of the problems that we talked about was the atmosphere that goes over the globe. So we have this with climate change, the oceans and health, everything that spans the globe and creates problems for, it can't be solved in one nation only. We have to have a global council to take care of it. So this is that is a important thing in that started a lot of what we are seeing today. It kicked off an agenda that started to, a lot of what was written in the Rockefeller panel reports, as it was named to when it was published as a book.
What year was that?
It was published in 1961, but the agenda but this, it was a number of reports that were put into one book. So they were kind of published in the late 50s and then put into one book in 1961. And it influenced. We can say it was a part of the presidential administrations of the 60s, the Kennedys and Lyndon Johnson and Lady Nixon. So everything was in it, and it developed from that.
Has any link to the vaccines that started in the 60s, I think? With Kennedy started some I think there was a study about vaccines, and they started more vaccinations in USA during the 60s.
Yeah. I mean, everything. They discussed these things in the 50s, of course, and then they made more policy of it in the 60s, and it later came into the more global agenda, or United Nations agenda, of course.
Okay, so nowadays you don't see the name Rockefeller anymore. It's more, but if you go by what you told us and your book, they influenced a lot of global organizations like United Nations and World Health Organizations. And as USA is so powerful, I mean, their plan has had a lot of influence on what's happening today. and they're showing this global threats like global warming. And when you check the solution to the global warming crisis, it looks quite similar to the solution to this corona crisis we're having now.
Yes.
So why is that those so similar? Because it's quite different problems if you think about.
Yeah, the thing is, it's the same solution because it's always been the same solution. It's only the problems that had, changed. I mean, and in the end, this is an agenda for total global control. And the thing is, if you look into to climate change, they talked about this in annual review from 2005, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. They talk about the climate change because in that year they decided this is the number one thing to fund, and they said this is a problem that it's more or less the perfect problem because it hits everything. It affects everything. And if you remember this with climate change, we also have had this. Came some reports and propaganda about if it gets warmer, we will have more pandemics. We will have more diseases over the world because it's warming. So it has been prepared from early on in the public mind to see it as it has connections, but also, of course, the grand solution to this. But it's always been global control. It's both its problems that spans the globe. So so what has always been there, but this corona now is the perfect trigger because climate is more diffuse. It's hard to scare people with climate change. We have this. You can die with this virus. It is more.
It takes more time, and you need to have maybe 10 years of propaganda in education system for someone to really get scared about it. It's not so quick.
Yeah. The corona comes directly. And it's always been. People are afraid of the get sickness and die and everything. So it's perfect. And now we say, this is. We hear from the Club of Rome. We hear from Johan Rockström, the head of the Potsdam Institute in Berlin, very important in climate issue, saying that this is the same agenda, and it's perfect because now no, you can't fly over the globe, you can't do these things, and so now we claim, the environment gets better now when people don't do things, because it's we who are the enemy in this.
One thing I thought about is this whole medical complex, like you call big pharma in USA, but Rockefeller was quite driving in the start of both the education system and making this chemical pharmaceuticals from the oil industry.
Yeah.
So they've been have a big stake in this whole pharmaceutical industry, and as now you cannot make so much money on pharmaceuticals because in USA at least you can get sued for quite big money for side effects, but for vaccines there's an exemption in almost all the world, so you can you only have a maximum amount of money you can get, even if your child dies of vaccine damage. You cannot get like $1 billion. There's a quite small limit. So you can potentially make much more money on these vaccination programs than you can make on pharmaceuticals nowadays.
Yeah, of course. It's perfect for them. And it's always been this also to create kind of a problem that you I mean, it's on different levels. One thing is to bring in this new society that they always have wanted, but also to earn money on it, on all the measures that you take. So and as I say, I mean, it goes back a long time. I mean, the Rockefeller started with more or less the medical. I mean, they started the Rockefeller University, or the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in the early. I think it was like 1901. So they have always been into these things, and they have been huge before. Now we only talk about Bill Gates and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but before Bill Gates, it was the Rockefeller Foundation that were involved in these vaccination programs and so on, and of course of population control concerns and these initiatives that came from John D. Rockefeller III Population Council. Bill Gates has he has taken over this agenda. Now he is riding the horse. So just taking over this with a lot of help from the Rockefellers, because they have been there. So I mean, they further their agenda together. So.
I was thinking about what's happening now with the whole Corona situation. Because if it's not just coincidence what's happening, if there's some bigger plan, I mean, it should take a lot of coordination. And I've been thinking about some things myself, that what you told about the Rockefellers having a lot of influence in United Nations and WHO, and then I see the Rockefeller Institute is I think they're sponsoring this Johns Hopkins University, or they have some kind of connection from what I've seen.
Yeah.
And also and then you talked about Bill Gates. He has his own thing, but he has the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then last year in October, approximately at the same time when the virus could have started spreading in China, they had this event 201, where they invited a lot of companies, like for example Johnson and Johnson, who's now going to got a big contract for making a vaccine, and airplane companies and banks and WHO and like basically like the whole global thing. And then I have one thing I saw myself. I was on some kind of conference a few years ago, and there was a presentation there that was taken from another person that got it, and he got it on a meeting of global big companies that nowadays you have a lot of these big funds or foundations or that they own a lot of companies like investment funds, and they gave a presentation where they were describing kind of like happening today, but I didn't really see the connection when I saw it. It was 5 years ago maybe, and they were talking about in Europe you would have huge unemployment and people having to get this like money from the state, like a citizen salary, but very low, so they would live on like just get by, get food and rent and nothing else, couldn't travel or do anything. And then they were portraying this global warming as a threat who was like ruining the world, and because that was a few years ago. And then they said that and a big threat. I think they also want to have a boogeyman. They said Trump was a big threat, like the nationalism. But they were describing something that's happening today, that the countries got more closed off. So both this event 201 and these reports that are handed out to big companies, it seems like they don't give all the details all the time, except to maybe some insiders. But if you're aware, I think a lot of these company leaders expect what's going to happen, because it's been so much information in that direction, so many trainings, not only event 201, there's been many reports. So what do you say to why is this trainings out in the open on YouTube, and so everyone can see it? And do people? I don't think everyone believes it's just a coincidence. So what do you take from all this preparation?
I mean, it has always been. I mean, that was a thing that surprised me when I started my research when I was a doctoral student, but this was 12 years ago, and reading all these reports, and everything was in the open. I've actually said what they were wanted to achieve, but it's the thing is, and now it's more obvious than ever, I would say, because before the reports were there, but it wasn't that easy. You had to know where to look for them, but now it's very, very open, and this with the corona and the pandemics. I mean, we started in 2006. They released the World Economic Forum. I mean, that's the big corporations in the world. They released the Global Risks Report, the first global risks report, and in this they said they had three big risks at that time, and it was terrorism, of course. It was after the 9/11. Climate change was fairly new at that time to get into the news, and then it was pandemics. And if you look into what they had, I mean, how do we act to against these risks? It's very close to what has come now with top-down surveillance and a lot of these measures, and this with the use of technology, because this is it's big tech and big pharma together. That's very important. And they have, I mean, they have had their meetings. They have their working groups at the World Economic Forum, and they have this. I mean, the thing with World Economic Forum, they say themselves that they are the premier global forum for public-private partnership. It's a nice word for fascism, I would say. So, I mean, they have been prepared for this for a long time. They have known that it would come a pandemic, not exactly when, but it would come, and they are prepared for it. And in these things with what happened with Event 201, I mean, we had reports from World Economic Forum the same year, but they said these things. So, European Commission, they also had meetings about this. So clearly they knew what will happen, and it's the thing is they can put out these videos, they can put out all these reports, because at the same time it's so much crap on the internet, so much disinformation, and the thing now, it's such stupid things that people take, and but they're telling some truths and then leading people into strange directions or lunatic things every time. So, and that's how we do it, and have always done. As I saw it early on, I mean, I had all this information. I mean, when I wrote my doctoral thesis, I had this information. It was very, you could check it. It was very obvious. We said it all, but at the same time, we had a lot of these conspiracies, and we had this with conspiracy theorists that came up with this very outlandish stuff connected to this correct stuff, talking about reptilians or whatever it is. I just wanted to have this facts, something, and that's the only interesting here. What can be proven? Speculate we can do a lot, but what can be proven? That's the important thing. So I don't think. I mean, it's very. You can put up this thing. We do it all the time. We have done for a long time, but you just fool people to follow the wrong horse all the time. So that's why I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think more people are waking up today, but as you say, there's so much disinformation around,
Yeah.
and some might just be people having the wrong ideas, and some might be people who are paid to doing this. What I've been noticing that people news channel that have more percentage of facts. Like I follow Infowars in USA that according to me they have quite much they check the documents and have facts and they got banned from all social platforms and so on and to counter that they still fill the void with this Q memes and you know more
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
could be some truths but then you don't know who's behind it. It's totally
Yeah, yeah. As
anonymous
you mix, I mean, and also when you have this leader that's going to save you, that's bullshit. We have to save ourselves. That's the thing. I'm very very tired of hearing this Q thing, and I mean. It's just to do your fact checking. Just to, I mean, sees Trump as a savior. It's just stupid. I mean, it's just go into check the administration. Who are the guys? Who are the closest advisors and everything? So, I mean, it's the elite people. I mean, one of the Trump's closest advisors is in the steering committee of a Bilderberg group. For God's sake, wake up! I mean, it's one. I have this in my lectures with this. How do you rule the game? You control both sides. I mean, it's the chessboard, black and white. We have always been have this. So now we are making this thing with the Trump as the savior, but it has been tested before. It's just to check these people and what we are up to. I mean, it's not the nicest guys. Why would we trust it?
I think with Trump, when he was just elected, he has some good people in his administration, like O'Bannon and that General Flynn and so on. But they all got. I think they have a process in USA when you appoint people to administration, they have to get approved, and they delayed approval so long, so he couldn't really start his government, and he had to take in other people, and some of them got prosecuted for Russiagate, and so eventually, I guess he just caved in and said, "Okay, I take in the people you suggest to me because I cannot do anything otherwise." Like even if he was the president, he didn't have any real power.
The
Like,
presidents don't have that power. They don't. So I mean, it's and just to check who have funded, who have given money, and you always see these crooks. I mean, that's not a leader to follow. And I mean, all these things. He's going to save us from the evil pedophiles and these Clinton things. And I mean, where is coming from? I mean, what has been running for business before? Friends that he had before. I mean, he was fucking a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, it's so stupid. How can you believe it? And that's I don't understand it, and it makes me kind of frustrated that people buy into this when we have these facts out there, and it's discrediting all the truth movement and everybody what seek true truth. I think.
I think there's a large part to check the facts also, but those get banned in social media. You don't see them so much.
No, no,
They
yeah.
don't get promoted. So what do you think if you don't want to sit and wait for Trump or Q or anyone to save you? What can the average citizen who's a little bit aware of the issues do? It's like what's a few effective ways except just talking about this?
Uh, I mean, the thing is, we follow all the time, and the thing is, one thing with power, it is our belief in power that makes them powerful. We give the powerful the power, and that's the thing. I mean, we have a wonderful world outside, but we are scared. I mean, one of the things is to know that most what they are saying to us, the propaganda, is about giving us fear, fear mongering. So one thing is to actually check out the fact, and the thing I have wanted to do is just to bring it out, and tell people about it, and my book was written just I wanted to show how do these very powerful people act and think, because if you know how they think and plan things, I mean, this illusion doesn't hold together anymore. You know that it's just tricks. I mean, so that is. I mean, you have to educate yourself, of course, and don't fall into the traps all the time. But I mean, it's hard. Everyone does it. I have been doing it before. I mean, when you start to check out these things, you are suddenly waking up. It's very easy just to take whatever is on YouTube. So it is hard, but I have myself wanted to give something to people that are curious on how these things work.
So reading your book, Rockefeller Controlling the Game, I think is a good start. But if you wanna have a little bit shorter material, you publish on your own Faro Stiftelsen webpage. We can put a link to it.
Yeah, I publish on Faros, and it's some in English, some in Swedish, but I also contribute to Technocracy News in United States. It's run by Patrick Wood. He wrote a book together with Anthony Sutton in the late 70s about the Trilateral Commission. Patrick Wood, I think, is one of the best. He no rubbish on his. He's very clear about this agenda, where it's heading. We're heading into technocracy, a global technocracy, if we're not doing anything. But I have written some pieces for him, and it's very. I'm very happy for it, because Patrick Wood is maybe one I have been wanted to write for, just because, I mean, he was also writing together with Anthony Sutton, but I think is one of the most important, best researchers to expose this agenda. Very, very serious guy. So
I've read some of his books, and even if he's very, very serious, he still goes into some of these secret societies. But he sticks to the facts. He doesn't.
That's
It's
what
not
I think
it's not so mystical. But he goes into who's in there and what they're doing, and he goes into their weird rituals and whatever they've been doing on Yale University and so on. But it's factual, and it's based on
it
it's
is.
based on observation. So okay,
Yeah.
so. We put the links to your pages and everything. So, but I think reading your book and Anthony Sutton, it's a good start. And as people like video and audio, I think in the future it would be good to have like a 2-3 week basic course. You know, what do you do when you wake up? How do you see through this information, and what sources do you have? Because it is really complicated.
Yeah, it is. I mean, people that don't not educated in this. I have I'm a PhD, so I know how to check facts. So and everybody don't do that. We don't have these skills.
So I think there's hope because many people are waking up and finding new ways to organize in smaller groups and to counter this whole propaganda. And I think a lot of people see through the illusions nowadays. But if in the worst case scenario, if people don't do enough to stop this, what would happen if the Rockefellers and the elite get their utopia? Like if it keeps going like this for another 50 years, and what do they want for the future? Because they're having some end goals. I guess they don't want to have this chaos themselves all the time.
No. Maybe.
What are they working for at the end?
I mean, it is a global digital utopia. I mean, it's a controlled society where every individual is controlled, connected to like the central database and influenced from above, like controlled slaves. Everyone. It's a nightmare society if you look into it. It's ugly, and then it's more like you have the ones at the top. It's like a feudal society. The ones at the top, they can travel where we want. We can do what we want, and you have a controlled population. But it's a much smaller population we have today, because we are not sustainable. We are not needed. We don't need that much people in the world in the future. And it will be run by these very sophisticated technologies that are now being implemented all over the world. It's like for us a digital prison, and we're heading that very fast now because of the corona, and where everything we will do is tracked, and we have to have digital identification to to go into the shop or whatever.
So to me, it seems maybe we're not there totally today, but a lot of those things are already here. The technology is here, and we're surveilled and and influenced by mass media propaganda. But it seems like even if they this time don't succeed, if people don't want to take this ID 2020 and all this, and if it's going to be blocked in some countries, I mean, they probably will come back in a few years and try something else. It is like they're doing step by step, and if they fail, they just rebrand it and they come back again.
So we will have crisis after crisis until they get what we want, and then this is stated by the Club of Rome. Recently, they wrote at the World Economic Forum an article, but they said, I mean, COVID-19 is a crisis that shows the need for this new economic system, and if we don't get the new economic system now, we will get crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. So
if they don't get it this time, there will come just another crisis.
Yeah, it has been this way since the atomic bomb. I mean, we have had these global threats that we need to have this new society. That's the solution to it. So no, we are going to keep on doing it. And now 2030 is this very important year. We have Agenda 2030.
Okay, but we'll keep covering the topic, and thanks a lot for taking the time. I will post this and link to articles. So
yeah,
thanks a lot, Jacob.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.